What do we make of the results in Iowa? What do they tell us about the Republican Party if only a third of the Republicans in Iowa participate in the caucuses? And what does the fact that most party members don't participate in the nominating contests tell us about the voting process? To help us think about Iowa and the current state of political parties, in this case, the Republican Party, we are joined by Lynn Vavreck. She's a professor of American politics at UCLA. Lynn, it's great to see you. We're crunched on time, so how should we think about the small number of voters who participated in the Iowa caucuses? Are we in danger of overreading the results, or is this giving us a good picture of where the Republican Party is?
Well, two things are relevant. The fact that it's Iowa and those voters might be different than voters in the rest of the country. And I think we've heard a lot about that tonight and how they're different from voters in New Hampshire. But it's also tempting to think that people who participate in these primaries and caucuses might be different than the people who participate in general elections. And they are on some dimensions. They're more interested, they care more, but they're not that different in terms of the policy preferences and the kinds of worlds that they want to build.
You've written about how identity plays a role in politics. You wrote about it a lot more before we became obsessed with it. Help us understand the role that identity plays in how Republican voters see the candidates and how they see the issues.
Well, when we talk about identity, and we talked about this in some books that we've written about these elections, we're talking about the rise of these identity-inflected issues. So all of the things that you've been seeing flash at the bottom of the screen, voters who think about immigration, voters who think about abortion. So these issues have percolated to be the issues that are most important to voters relative to things like the role and size of government and the tax rate. And I think your entrance poll data that viewers have been seeing on the bottom of the screen really reflect this, that these are the kinds of issues people are saying are most important to them. That's new since 2016. And for everybody who's waiting for us to go back to the way it was, it doesn't look like we're going back.
And what is their relationship with those issues in terms of how attached to them they are and how fixed they are in terms of what if a candidate from the other party says, well, no, here's a different way you should think about these issues?
Well, I mean, that would be a great way to try to steal voters, if you will, from your opponent. But the problem is, on these identity issues, let's take same-sex marriage as an example. And think about it in contrast to an issue like what the tax rate should be. On tax rate, a candidate could compromise a little bit and could say, okay, so-and-so wants 50%, I want 30%. I'm going to try to move a little closer. I'll say 35. But on same-sex marriage, it's very hard to compromise. And it's hard to compromise on these identity-inflected issues. You can't be married on Monday and Tuesday and not on Wednesday and Thursday, and only on Friday if you want to be. So compromise is harder, and people know what kind of world they want to live in. They know which candidate represents that world. And that's why you see a lot less of this sort of, I'm going to try to moderate a little bit to steal votes from the other side.
Lynn Vavreck, professor of American politics at UCLA. Thank you.